All right, welcome back to the Tactical Pause podcast. I'm Kevin Price.
I'm Kevin Reed.
And if you haven't done so already, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to the channel. It's really the best way to support what we're doing here. Now, today we're going to do something a little bit different. We asked our audience to submit some questions regarding general military knowledge or military related questions having to do with current events that are going on in the world today. But before we get to that, I want to touch on the origins behind what led to the creating of our podcast. Now, Kevin Reed and I were both a part of a larger military chat group, which we get on there and talk politics, sports, and all kinds of other stuff. We talk a lot of shit, you know, and we thought it would be fun to turn that into a podcast. So Kevin and I are doing exactly that. The unique thing about Kevin and I is we bring a military perspective. We are progressives, but we also see a lot of world events through a different lens because of our service. So it may come off a little bit different than your standard progressive. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to give Kevin an opportunity to tell us about his service in the military, what he did, what his job was, so that you can get an understanding of where his perspective comes from. And then I'll do the same, and then we'll roll right into the questions. So, Kevin, tell us about your time in service.
Thanks, man. Yeah, served just under 15 years. I was medically retired. I got injured in Afghanistan due to, I was probably an amalgamation of things, not just one. But I served my entire career in the intelligence community. I started off as a cryptologic linguist. I did Russian and some other things. And then back during the surge, they forced transitioned all of us to what the old MOS code was 96 Bravo, and now it's 35 Foxtrot. I spent the rest of the next 10 years in that field. I went to multiple different TUIs, multiple different academies. Went to the Master Analyst Academy. Was granted the one Fox identifier for passing that, which is very difficult to do. And afterwards, I spent the bulk of my career in and out of Iraq, Afghanistan, the DMZ in Korea. We had a couple Africa missions in the works that were going off. So my experience is largely through not just the planning phases of military operations, but the execution of them, how to properly identify not just unique individuals or key terrain, but what happens if a certain thing were to take place. For instance, let's say you've got a bad guy that you need to get a control over. They come to me and they say, Kevin, I want to kill this guy. What happens if I do that? And my job is to go in and say, so if we eliminate this individual, who are the people below him that will take power? Are they more or less dangerous than he is? Do they have a different set of ideals? So we run through not just the different personalities, but we run through the different patterns and systems of behavior and help the commander understand better courses of action to make us just as lethal without committing us to investing more blood and treasure or to prevent us from making a serious mistake.
Awesome. Well, I joined the Army in 2004. I initially actually joined the reserves, and I've held three different MOSs, the first of which I never really did because I had my MOS in the Army Reserves, which is carpentry and masonry, 12 whiskey. I went to the AIT. I came back to my unit and I said, I want to go active duty. I want to go combat arms. So I went back to MEPS and I joined as a 13 Papa, which is now a 13 Juliet because they merged cannon artillery with the rocket missile artillery as far as fire direction goes. So that was fire direction for the MLRS, which stands for Multiple Launch Rocket System. It's one of the rocket systems we sent out to Ukraine. But I did that job up until, I guess, about 2008. I reclassified to 25 uniform, which is a signal support specialist working on radios and tactical communications equipment, that type of thing. In that, I deployed to Iraq. After that, I got detailed as a United States Army recruiter. And then I went back to my MOS after that time as a 25 uniform. And I served out the remaining part of my time at Fort Lewis, Washington, as a brigade ComSec security manager. And I've been out for about 10 or 11 years now, and that's sort of the knowledge I bring to the table. And so we had only a couple people submit questions, but they submitted very detailed questions and multiple questions. So I think we're going to run through those and see where it takes us today. Our first question comes from one of our audience members by the name of Ian White. And it says, does the law obligate officers to disobey illegal orders? And if so, are non-commissioned members of the military bound by the same law and to the same extent, or is the defense of following orders sufficient in court to overcome accusations of war crimes against them? Now, this question goes on, but I think we can start there. Now, what I understand from the UCMJ is not only does it say that you don't have to follow illegal orders, you're actually required not to follow illegal orders. You can be held accountable for that. Likewise, the person that is giving those illegal orders can be held accountable. And now, I don't know if I've ever found myself in that situation, but what do you have to add to that?
So as a person who's had to help plan military operations, we work with JAG to set the rules of engagement for different combat scenarios. One of which we tell soldiers. So like the when you go to combat, I don't know if you had this experience, Kevin, but we did. And each time we went before you got to Iraq or Afghanistan, you had to sign a pledge, right? Say they had a JAG lawyer up there tell you this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do. And if anyone tells you something that you cannot do, and you follow that order, you are being told right now that you are violating the laws of war, and that is an unlawful order. And I mean, they tell you that there's, using your military bearing and tactics to respectfully tell the superior, hey, that's not in the laws of war. We can't do that, right? So a good example would be someone says, we're going to go blow up this water desalination plant, right? That's not key terrain for a military objective because it's a humanitarian objective, right? Being able to take salt out of water and then make it consumable is for every human being. It's a human need. We don't target those facilities because in such a way you're doing more damage than you can ever repair, because now you're going to set a bunch of people who are going to be considered what are called IDPs, or internally displaced persons. Those people are going to have no water, but they're going to have nowhere to go. So now you've created a situation in which you, as the aggressor, should, under the law, provide the water if you're the one that caused the event. But that's considered a war crime because you are going to end up killing more civilians than you are affecting the military, right? Most militaries in the world have a way to procure their own water, to purify it. So it's not a legal target. If someone were to say, Staff Sergeant Reed, you and your troops are going to go over there and you're going to blow up that plant, the response should be, according to the law, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, along with the Geneva Conventions, should be, I'm sorry, Sergeant, sir, ma'am, that is a crime of war. We're not authorized to do that. We can't engage in that conduct. Now, I might have to suffer some local consequences. They might submit me for NJP or non-judicial punishment or remove me from my post. But that's sort of the point. When I was in Afghanistan, we had a guy cycle before us who went into a village and killed people without determining the positive ID that they were Taliban. That's against the law. He's now in Leavenworth. There was a huge trial. It was a big deal. It took us a long time to rebuild trust in the Afghan communities because this guy, who was a staff sergeant at the time, walked off base and just started killing people in their homes. Right? There's reasons we don't do that, right? It's amoral and illegal and wrong. But on the other end, from a purely tactical perspective, right? I have now created more of a problem for myself because that community no longer trusts me. So I'm going to have to work twice as hard to get information that's reliable. I'm not going to have safety from that community. They're not going to look out for me. They're not going to look out for the troops. They're actually probably more likely to be more welcoming to the enemy, who is of their own language and of their own nationality. You've really created more problems for yourself than you would ever have solved. And so laws of war are meant to bring moral clarity and ethical clarity to war. But at the same time, from the tactical perspective, like, it's don't overcomplicate your situation any more than you need to.
Absolutely. And I think the basis of this question is really coming out of some current events, considering some of the things we've done in Venezuela with some of the boats and, killing survivors and things like that. Because one of the things you're not supposed to do is kill civilians knowingly. I mean, collateral damage is a thing. It's become kind of overused recently, I think. And I know Mark Kelly and some other legislative members have stepped forward and put out a message to military members saying you do not have to obey unlawful orders. Which now I have a mixed view on this because while the technical answer is you do not need to follow unlawful orders, like we know that, I think everybody in the service knows that, or at least they should. The only problem I had with that message was when they said it was that everything's very polarized right now, and
Yeah.
it's been like that for a while. And you have this young soldier that doesn't know better and hears that, and maybe it radicalizes them in a more dangerous way. So that's the perspective kind of I saw it from. I didn't necessarily think that Mark Kelly should be held accountable for that because he didn't say anything wrong.
Right.
But so I had nothing wrong with what he said. I just thought that maybe they didn't think about possibly the
They
after
didn't,
effect. Luckily, nothing like that has happened to my knowledge, but that's the one thing that concerned me.
yeah, I think that when you look at stuff like that, there are better avenues to get that before troop. The military has its own channels, which they would know about. They're all former military or worked in the government, whether it's through AFN or putting stuff in Stars and Stripes or through other military channels, right? Like, I mean, they work at the Congress. They could have easily said, we would like the service to once again ensure every service member has signed a up-to-date law of war briefing, which is something you do annually anyway. Also, I'm just going to point this out. When I was active duty, I paid no attention to current events outside of what I had to focus on. So, and Mark Kelly, had I been in uniform at this time and that came out, I may not have known it until my mother sent me the video. Hey, have you seen this? And I wouldn't have. I didn't have time to sit there and watch, cable news all the time. I had to focus on what the current events were in my little sector and what I was working on. And then outside of that, I had a kid, at that time. I had a young kid I was responsible for. I had chores and other stuff that occupied my mind. I didn't have the time to sit there and look at a video unless someone sent it to me and put it in front of my face. So I kind of took it that way. It kind of made me smile thinking of yeah, but what troop is really like I wonder what Mark Kelly says today. Like no one, no one's looking at that. No one's, as far as I know, maybe they are. Maybe it's so polarized now because I retired in February of 16 before Trump took office the first time. So maybe it's gotten worse in the service. I mean, most of the people that were my subordinates that became senior NCOs or warrant officers are now out of the service. So I think most of them are retired now. So I don't even know what it's like there. Maybe there are people who are looking for that guidance. But I do think you're right. I think your point is good. We ought to make sure that it's done through the appropriate channels. We ought to make sure that it's actually not going to grate the nerves of people who are going to make a stink about it, who don't care, right? They just wanted to make a stink about Democratic telling people not to obey Trump, which, yeah, it's a really flimsy argument. At the same time, you've got the right channels to do so. Use the appropriate networks and channels. Make sure that stuff's updated. Because I'll tell you this: they signed that form. They put their name on there. Says I've got the law of war form. You cannot say I was just following orders because they're going to pull that up and say, "Is this your pen and ink signature that says I received the briefing?" And they'll say, "Yes, it is." Like you, there are no orders that you should have followed because you signed that you knew this was wrong, and that's how they get you. That's how they're always going to get you.
And there's another part of the question which it handles more of the court side of the question. It says also, can a non-military court overrule a court-martial verdict and or sentence in such cases, whether involving either officers or non-commissioned personnel? And I actually had to look this up because I really didn't know. But you can actually appeal cases, but it goes through a armed forces appellate court. The only time it really transitions to a civilian court is once it gets to the Supreme Court level. Outside of that, it is all handled by a military court system. So no, at least at the lower level, it would not go to a civilian court. Yes, at the upper level at the Supreme Court. Now, he does go on to ask questions about, the military leaders given an order being held accountable, which I think we already kind of answered that they can. Now, as far as the Secretary of Defense and our Commander in Chief, Donald J. Trump, I would say Pete Hegseth for sure. Donald Trump, I would say yes, he should be. But however, I know the Supreme Court ruled for presidential immunity, so I'm not sure how that plays into that.
I think a smart attorney could build a case that, I mean, you don't even have to get Trump involved in this. Hegseth knew better, right? He's had this training. He knows better. I don't, I think the question becomes what court do you imagine holds these people accountable? I don't know that there is one in the United States that could. I think that you're probably looking at like the International Criminal Court, which we're, of course, not a signatory of, but I mean, you're going to need a court like that, something international that will hold them accountable because I don't know that you have the political will in this country to do it.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's an avenue to go after Trump. Impeachment, maybe. I think it would mostly have to be handled through Congress if there was something that really happened to Trump over it. Otherwise, I just don't see it happening as far as, like you said, a civilian court doing that. Now, our other questions come from an audience member by the name of Terry Pettyjohn. His first question, he has several, but we'll see if we can get through all of them. The first one asks, should the DoD have been changed to the Department of War? And I don't think it's actually technically been changed to the Department of War because it has to go through Congress,
Yeah.
even though they're calling it the Department of War. The Department of the Army was called the Department of War before 1947, and then they had the Department of the Navy as well, which they merged to give the branches a little bit more of a coalition aspect under the Department of Defense. I personally think the Department of War is maybe a little too aggressive, and the Department of Defense speaks more to like containment and readiness and the fact that the military does more than just war. So I don't lose a lot of sleep over it, but at the same time, I think it's fucking stupid. So
I thought it was the least thing I should care about in all this train wreck of an administration. Should it have been changed? Should they invest the money? Absolutely not. But this is like what happens when you allow a bunch of like sophomore level frat boys to take over the government. We're gonna call it the Department of fucking War. You're like, all right, like, do you know what you're doing? They're like, yeah, we're the Department of War, so yeah, we do. Okay, I guess. You know, I think that for me, like, no, it shouldn't have been, but at the same time, like, we have evidence that they've double tapped a girls' school using an experimental missile. The Department of War, I think, is the least of my concerns at this point.
and oh my God, I hate to get off on a tangent. When Israel first got involved with Palestine prior to this whole thing with Iran, people would say that they were committing genocide against the Palestinians, and I was a little standoffish about saying it was genocide at first because, Hamas did attack them. So at one point I was like, they do have the right to retaliate against Hamas. But there's a 9-to-1 ratio of the civilians to the Hamas members that get killed. So that's nine Palestinian civilians to every one person in Hamas. So I feel like they're almost using Hamas as a way to eradicate Palestinians. I could be wrong, but it certainly fucking seems that way. And if that's the case, then it absolutely is genocide. 100%. I have a very much different perspective about that now.
I have never felt that I could trust anything that came out of Benjamin Netanyahu's mouth, that I would need to verify things independently. Yes, October 7th was bad. Hamas did a lot of horrible and explicitly just criminal things wrong. At the same time, leveling the entire West Bank and Gaza Strip to rubble, expanding your footprint into neighboring countries like Lebanon and Jordan, parts of Syria, now expanding a war which you've goaded the United States into in Iran, does not seem to me to be the actions of a defensive maneuver, right? Why are we doing all this? Why is Israel needing this? It's not for their protection. It's not, from what I can observe and what I can see, it's for their expansion. They're looking to expand themselves into a regional power. And I think that essentially they're going to do their best to eradicate the Iranian influence in the region and become the sole power there.
The next question, also from Terry Pettyjohn. Are we spending enough or too much on the military? We spend as much as the next 9 to 10 countries combined, and I know that's true. Now, I have a couple of viewpoints on this. I am all for the defense of the United States of America, and I'm all for spending whatever it takes to do that. However, I have seen a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse during my time in the service. There were times where they wouldn't pay for shit that we needed, and then there was times that they paid for way more shit than we needed. So here's one example. When I was in Germany, working in communications, we took our Bradleys out to the range, and we didn't have the jump cables that we needed to use to listen into them at the range. So we had one, and every time a tank would go up, excuse me, a Bradley, somebody that drives a Bradley would get on to me if I called it a tank. But after one got done firing, we'd run up to the Bradley, get the jump cable, run up to the next Bradley, attach the jump cable, and like we needed more of those. It's something we needed more of, but it wasn't in the budget at the time. But then we get to Iraq and we had an open budget and we just spent money willy-nilly on like fucking everything. Our lieutenant colonel, I'm not going to name names, he got this big fancy wood carved desk with our open budget for his thing. And he got a tea set to have tea with the dignitaries and things like that. And we're in this trailer of a building with like plywood walls and all this stuff. And he had that, and he had this tea set, and it's just dumb shit, you know. And there, I mean, there are a lot of things that we purchased that we needed, and it usually comes from the fucking higher ups a lot of times. At least from my perspective, in the infantry unit I was in, it seemed absolutely ridiculous. So I do believe that our budget would probably still be pretty fucking high, but we definitely could reduce it at the same time. So I don't know. I don't know what your perspective is, what you've seen.
I just remember being in Iraq, and I was with an engineer unit that had an entire platoon of people who do HVAC and prime power, which is an 18-month long MOS. You sign up for active duty years because you're certified to generate electricity. You're certified to do all the HVAC stuff, and the Army's going to get theirs out of you. So we get to Iraq, which notoriously is very hot, and we have all these window units and these old. We're in the. I don't know if you had them to choose the like the old rail cars is what. And I was a Sergeant E5 at the time, so I had one to myself. And the air conditioning unit would get too clogged with dirt, get too hot, and shut down. But instead of being able to call one of my neighboring platoons to fix AC and fix heating, we had to call Halliburton. There was a Halliburton contracted employee who, by the way, every time he picked up the phone and said hello, was $500 in his pocket. Cha-ching. He got $1,000 for showing up. If he fixed it and it was working, he got another $1,000. So you're spending almost $3,000 as a taxpayer for some civilian to come out, take a bottle of water, poke a bunch of holes in the cap, spray it down on the outside of the machine, and leave. Right? We've trained these people to do so. Like I really want civilians to understand the reason your military budget is so high is because the military industrial complex is raping you silly. They are taking as much money as they can, and then they frame it as like, oh, you don't want to hurt the troops, do you? No one wants to hurt the troops. No one's a fucking idiot. But you can reduce that budget down by saying, actually, I have a platoon full of people, 30 to 45 people whose sole job it is to do HVAC. So I'm not going to pay Halliburton to do that anymore. That's what they're supposed to do. Now, what did those platoon members do? They went and became guards on the guard towers around the base. That was their sole job. The only thing they did. And it just drives you nuts. Like, what's the point?
Well, another one of the questions, which I was going to do last, but I think it kind of goes along with what we're already talking about, is he asked, what do you think of Eisenhower's comment on the military industrial complex? Now, I don't know the exact quote, but talking about the military industrial complex, you know, we get in bed with all these big businesses, and sometimes it's more lucrative for them, for us to be in war. And I fucking see that. Like, I've had to order parts for things in the military, and when it comes down to even things like nuts and bolts, and you order them and you're like, how much are we paying for that? You could go to Lowe's,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
spend way less than we spend on some of this shit that we need. Like $8 for a nut, like $15 for a bolt. What kind of ridiculousness is that? But we do that knowingly and willingly because we have these contracts with people, with Harris Communications or General Dynamics or fucking Halliburton or
L3,
whatever, you know, and
Booz Allen, yeah.
it's absolutely ridiculous. And I just feel like I'm all for the military having what it needs to defend our country. I'm absolutely for it because there's so many threats that our nation realistically does face, you know, and we have people like the Navy SEALs and the Green Berets that handle threats that people don't even fucking know about. You know, there's so many threats to our country that get handled on a daily basis and people have fucking no idea about. And our military needs the resources to handle those things. But there's also, I think it gets into the weeds more with some of the major conflicts like what we're seeing in Iran. And we can do what we need to do without being excessive. And we need to scrub those contracts for people like that, in my opinion. We need to say either you charge us fucking less or we're getting our shit for somewhere else, you know?
And I think, I think that's a thing Trump was talking about, the American people getting ripped off. And that is not a lie when it comes to the Defense Department. That is the amount of money we spend on equipment, even the intelligence equipment, is just absurd. And it's amazing at how, I mean, just how bad people don't, I shouldn't say bad, but it's just how they obfuscate that away from the public because they say, oh, we need 1.2 trillion for the Defense Department, and that's what people hear. I want yeah, the American public ought to get a pie chart that tells them a breakdown of where that money goes. This is what goes for pay for soldiers. This is what goes for soldiers' food and housing. This is what goes to keep the bases operational, running power plants, water purification, that kind of stuff. And then show them the budget for contracting. Show them the budget that we pay Booz Allen Hamilton, L3, Boeing, Halliburton, all the others, and ask the question: is this in the defense of the nation? Do you believe that this is in the best interest of the United States of America? Because it really isn't, right? Sure, there's innovation there. There's a lot of really good innovation. I think that even during my time, both in Iraq, Afghanistan, through Korea, and a couple other places, we've seen leaps and bounds in technology and how that equipment can be used as a deterrent to America's enemy. And at the same time, the amount of money we have poured into this, and they are simply just licensing the equipment for our use, we are paying for that property. It just doesn't feel like it's a good deal for the taxpayer. And it doesn't feel like if they really knew what the breakdown of that would be, I think would hopefully have people calling their senators and their congressional representatives and saying, hey, no more to this. I'm done with this.
We just go off the rails when it comes to spending aggressively, and I just think that's something we definitely need to handle up on. Um, the last question, and this is also from Terry Pettyjohn. Should we have a mandatory public service?
I see both sides of that. I'm saying no. I don't think that you can force people into a service that is meaningful. Like, I don't think that a conscription service for the United States does anything, right? I believe in AmeriCorps. I believe in the Peace Corps. I think that, encouraging people to do that by providing incentives for higher education, incentives for access to certain trades is beneficial. Like, hey, if you'll come be a carpenter in the Peace Corps, we'll make sure that you have all the certifications you need to leave the Peace Corps and have a career afterwards. I think those are all really beneficial things to do. To force somebody into that, I think opens up a whole other can of worms. I mean, just even thinking about our service times, it doesn't take more than one person to fuck something up for a unit. You get one person with a bad attitude in there that just drags ass, bitches about the whole fucking thing. I mean, it doesn't take much. So I think that if I come to you from the non-commissioned officer perspective, like, no, absolutely not. Don't do that. Incentivize, subsidize, but don't force.
I mean, I don't think it helps any by forcing people into the service because already there's people that probably shouldn't be in the fucking service. I've served alongside so many people that I'm like, how the fuck did you get here? But at the same time, you want somebody that wants to be there. You want somebody that wants to do the job, who is good at doing the job. I don't want somebody next to me that I can't trust. To me, I think that's more dangerous. If you're just throwing bodies at the situation, you're just going to have a bunch more dead bodies. That's that's all you're going to have. Or you can get people that know what the fuck they're doing, and they get it done more calculated and more surgical and more, strategically, and I think that's the more important thing. I don't think we need to throw bodies at a situation. We don't. We're in such a technological age. We have fucking drones. We have our special operations forces, which are fucking stellar. You don't need all that shit. So I am absolutely against a public service. I get the argument, but I just don't agree with it. People use the argument because they feel like to be a man, you need to serve and all this other stuff. It usually comes from motherfuckers that have never served. It's like, don't you think we need a mandatory service? Motherfucker, if you thought that, you could have just fucking, it's volunteer. You could have came in, you know? Like, what are you talking about? So I think most service members, Democrat and Republican, would probably say what we're saying because we've seen those Joes who just are fuck ups like you're talking about and don't need to be there. They don't need to be there. Like you said, there's always one person in the unit, the one that drags everybody down. I mean, there's some soldiers that are good at one aspect of their job, though, and not at the other, too. I had a soldier in Iraq who he was stellar at PT. He did his job really well, but he was kind of a pussy, you know. And one time he had to go on a convoy. It was like the only convoy he ever went on in his time in Iraq. And he was just in tears because he knew, I mean, convoys can be dangerous. That's where you hit the roadside bombs, and that's why so he didn't want to go. And I went and consoled him a little bit, and I'm like, you still got to go, but
It,
sorry you feel that way, but you're getting on the fucking convoy.
it is what it is.
Yep, it's the stuff that makes NCOs roll their eyes, right?
I had soldiers that I had to, I had, I don't know, if I had a soldier that didn't know how to wash his own clothes. So I had to sit with him on a Saturday while my kid's an infant and like, so this is how you're going to wash your fucking clothes. Cause he didn't know how. His mom did it his whole life. So his first time doing laundry is in the army, and somehow he made it through basic and AIT. He gets to Fort Polk, and I walk in the office with him like, "Oh my God, someone smells like ass." And like I have no filter with that stuff. And he was like, "Well, I washed my clothes," so I'm like, "Ah, it's you." Like I don't have to smell around because he immediately was like, "It's I thought I washed my stuff." I'm like, "What did you wash it with?" And he's like, "I don't know." It's like, "What do you mean you don't know? Did you put it in the washing machine with laundry soap?" And he just gives you that like empty-eyed stare, like he understood none of what you said. Like he understood you speaking English, but nothing of what you said registered. And I'll never forget having to go on a Saturday and say, "Get your laundry. I'll teach you how to do it." And you have to teach this guy, who, by the way, has an insane IQ to be an intel person, at least structured to look at the things we look at, and just never knew how to wash his clothes.
When I was a recruiter, I tried to keep people out that I didn't feel like needed to be in the military. There's some people you put in that are just a contract. But what I've always found interesting is you always have somebody that takes the ASVAB and they get the super high score and they want to be infantry or they want to be something that requires like the most minimal score. And then I have people that have the bare minimum and they're like, I want to be military intelligence. I always had trouble racking my brain for that. I mean, sometimes it's, I had one person that had almost a perfect score in the ASVAB and he wanted to be a combat engineer because his father was a combat engineer in Vietnam or whatever. And I get that, but I was like, you could do anything.
It's always amazing to me, like the amount of people that come into the intelligence community are academically and intellectually so gifted, but we are all, and this is me included, the worst with basic tasks. My thing was I never had to budget as a young adult, but I also had ADHD to the point that my parents trying to teach me that was just a non-starter. Like, he's not going to get it. But that's so true for the entire community. Like you'll have people who come in who don't know how to wash their clothes. I've had soldiers who've come into the community who don't know how to wash their own ass. They just walk around and stink, and you're like, "Did you put soap on your body?" And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, there's so many varying degrees of that. And to think that you're going to force people, like, that's the thing, too. Like, in the intelligence community, they are kind of the less what you would call masculine, I guess. They don't do the big buff stuff. They're not like lifting weights all the time. At the same time, if you put one of those people in the infantry, I'm assuring you they're going to get their ass whooped just consistently. Like the cultures are too different between the intel and the infantry. I mean, we get along because I'm assigned to infantry units. I do the same things they do. But if you go to an infantry person's barracks after hours, they're drinking, they're playing Call of Duty, they're having throwing each other off balconies and stuff. You go to the intel barracks after hours, they're probably playing D&D in the day room. And this probably has been a campaign going on 6 months to a year. And they have like snacks and stuff set up. Like going to the intel barracks was great as an NCO because I walked in like, "What are y'all doing?" "Sergeant, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons." Like, "All right, great. Keep doing that." Very minimal drinking, if anything. Infantry barracks, man, I had a guy I walked up to at the 216 Infantry Barracks at Fort Riley, Kansas, and they had painted him blue. They had somehow gotten a gallon of Sherman-Williams paint from a hardware store. This soldier is drunk, also naked, and they have painted the entirety of his body blue. And by the time I got there to do the barracks walkthrough, he was asleep or passed out or whatever in the grass. And so I walk up, and the first thing that attracts my attention is here's a blue naked person just sitting outside the front door. So I peep my head in the door and I ask the charge of quarters and say, like, "Can I ask you a question?" And he goes, "Oh, is it the blue guy?" I said, "Yeah, I think it's the blue guy." So we had to talk to him. I said, is he that drunk where he's just passed out? He's like, yeah, I think so. So why don't we clean him up and get him to bed? Why are we leaving a nude man who's been painted blue out there? So I had to call his first sergeant as well. Like, hey, Private Joe Snuffy was found naked in blue, not because he's dead, because his battle buddies painted him with blue paint. And so the first sergeant has to come in now on a Friday night and say, why the fuck did y'all paint this motherfucker blue? And why did he get naked? And then they said, that's his idea. His idea was to get naked. Like, yeah, not a great idea. But I mean, think about shoving people without, any choice into that environment. Like it's going to seem like pure chaos to them. It's going to be overwhelming. I think that you have to give people the opportunity to make the choices that are better for them. There's no real national emergency I see where you're going to be like, we all got to pick up our rifles, boys and ladies, and just go fight the enemy. It's not going to be that way. And I think that any assumption that it's going to be that way is very silly.
Well, I can definitely speak to the infantry and even the artillery units having weekend incidents. I swear, like at least every other weekend, there was an alcohol related incident, sometimes more than that. Somebody got drunk and drove into a lake, or, somebody hazed somebody and tied them to a street pole or something, All these things are things that actually happen too, interestingly. I can never be surprised by anything in my life now because of my time in the service, because not only because of the combat related stuff, but so because some of the idiotic shit I've seen. Like nothing surprises me at this point in my life. And we come out with some really interesting stories. Like if you're in the military just for one term, you can come out with some stories, but having 10 plus years in the service, you have some stories.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's all I have question wise. But I'm going to go a different route here because that's where I'm at right now. I want you to tell me your most interesting army story.
Oh man. Um, I've got a few. I think the one that I think cracks me up the most is my first term in Iraq. We had our Iraqi army commander was just this bombastic individual who would come in and he'd talk to you and he'd talk to the colonel and he'd be like, I'm gonna fucking tell you this. And I mean he'd cuss like he was an American. I mean he'd have a Middle Eastern accent to it. He's like, I'm gonna fucking tell you this. Every fucking person here is corrupt but me. I'm the only uncorrupt one, which should tell you something. He's probably the corruptest one of the bunch. But he's all like, I'm the most Muslim, I'm the most holy, you know, everything about me is what you want, I'm the greatest thing. So I'm like, all right, so my job is to help go train him and his troops on how to do predictive analysis, all this other stuff. This dude's a drunk. Like, I'm taught like the most pious Muslims are teetotalers. They don't drink at all. And there's this like hidden liquor store, and he would come in with like Johnny Walker Black Label. And he'd be telling me, he goes, all these motherfuckers are corrupt. He's just pouring this whiskey into his coffee and drinking. And one day he called us, we had a little cell phone that he could call us on, and he said, "Oh, they put an ID under my car," which we knew was likely going to happen. They take the magnets from speakers, the old tower speakers, and they put an explosive in there, and they stick it to the bottom of your fuel tank, which definitely would kill you. So what does he do? He just rips it off with his hand and throws it out the window while he's driving. Just, don't need this. It's like, what in the world? And that was the entire deployment with him. Is he would do this crazy ass shit, and I'm like, Major, no, you're going to get yourself killed. Like, no, I'll be fine. He did get himself killed eventually. He also like overthrew the mayor of Tikrit one night because he pissed him off. Like he was just, I'm like, I thought you were the only uncorrupt one. He's like, yeah, I am. Okay, all right. I've also had a funnier one where I had a soldier at Fort Polk, and I was a young single father at this time. My son was probably about 2 years old. And I was out with him in the morning. There was some sort of on post event. My little kid, I get a phone call from the sergeant major, and I answer the phone. He goes, I need you to get your fucking ass to the barracks right now, which is never a good phone call to get. And I was like, all right. I said, Sergeant Major, I'm out with my son at the fishing pond. They're doing the thing. He's like, just bring your kid and come on. So I show up all of a sudden, and there's a line of NCOs that outrank me that go up the stairs into the doorway of this soldier's room. So now I'm walking into a situation I am not prepared for because I've not been explained what it is. But every NCO in my chain of command, and probably every other chain of command in the battalion, does know what I'm about to walk into. And with a mixture of horror and like gleeful hate that they just know I'm going about to have a horrible day, I walk in and I had a soldier who installed a stripper pole into his barracks room. to include like screwing it into the concrete in the ground and in the ceiling. And I went, dear God, what has happened? And the troop is sitting over there and he goes, my girlfriend was performing for me. And I said, well, where's your girlfriend now? Like, we had to take her to the NP station because she's 16. So he has an underage girl in his barracks room that he has made an unauthorized, absolute, not acceptable modification to his barracks room. And they found out on a Saturday morning during a surprise health and welfare inspection because they walked in and she was twirling around the pole. And that was a leadership lesson that I'll never forget. Like, Sergeant Reed, I see that you signed on Thursday that you walked through the soldier's barracks room and that you gave him the advice to do his laundry. And we had the old sign-in sheets on the back of the barracks door. So your NCO had to be there 3 times a week, had to walk through your room. It was a standard thing. And I said, yes. He goes, so sometime between Thursday morning and now, this stripper pole was installed. It's like, because I started mentioning, I'm guessing it wasn't here when you were here on Thursday. I said, no, negative, it wouldn't be. So basically, I spent the rest of my weekend, and I never lived it down while I was at that unit, that I had the soldier who had underage strippers in the barracks.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. And that's because I've served in the army. I have two wildest stories, but I think the most interesting one is probably my deployment to Romania and Bulgaria. It was after my deployment from Iraq. I was still in the infantry unit. We were switching over from mechanized infantry to light infantry and getting ready for a deployment to Afghanistan. Of course, I came down on recruiter orders before that, so I actually got out of going to Afghanistan. Nonetheless, I still went on the deployment to Romania and Bulgaria. So we went to Bulgaria first. We spent 30 days in Bulgaria, 30 days in Romania. We get to Bulgaria, and they were supposed to deliver pallets of water for us, and they did not deliver pallets of water for us. So we got out there, and then we only had the water that we carried on our person from Germany to Bulgaria. But they still proceeded with the training nonetheless. Like the infantry guys went out in the field. Now I was in a like a GP medium in a tent at the headquarters, so it wasn't so bad for me. But they had people becoming heat casualties like left and right because they didn't have a lot of water. And I was CLS certified, so I ended up having to go stick dozens of people. And eventually we did get the water, but that wasn't where the deployment ends. We also had a night live fire exercise in Bulgaria where one of our soldiers ended up getting shot because they put chem lights on the targets, but then they put chem lights on the people. But they were supposed to put different color chem lights, but this particular person had the same color chem light on him as the as the target. And so it was a new private. It was the E2. The It was the chillest soldier I've ever met, but he got shot in the back of the leg at the at the live fire exercise, and I ended up having to be on the aid and litter team for him, and so that was interesting. And then when I was in Romania, I set up a retransmission station, and I ended up getting attacked by a wolf while I was going to take a shit in the woods. I actually had to get a rabies shot on my deployment to Romania
Oh, no.
because I went out to a wood line. I had my little entrenching tool, right? I dug my hole, and like three wolves came out of nowhere and were trying to, I guess, intimidate me. I don't know if I was in their area. I don't know how wolves work, but I pulled up my trousers. I backed the hell out, but they were kind of snapping at me and clawing at me. And one of them got my arm and had like blood dripping down my arm. So they ended up giving me a rabies shot. So that was a very interesting deployment. It was probably more interesting than my time in Iraq.
Did it have to go like through your belly button? Is that the one they had to give you, the one that goes into your stomach?
I don't know if it was in my stomach. It might have been. I don't remember. But I know that I didn't necessarily have to get it because I was reading that you usually have to get a rabies shot if you get bitten, but not necessarily if you get clawed, which is what happened to me. But I guess they gave it to me as a precautionary measure. The other one, I did a deployment to White Sands Missile Range, and our friend Gene Freeman was there with me on that one. That was out of Fort Hood, and we had a soldier that was supposed to be on AHA guard, which is the ammo housing area, and it was like a specialist or something, and he's kind of goofy guy, but he just walked off into the middle of the desert with a loaded rifle, a saw actually, M249, and for no reason, no to tell anybody anything. He just fucking left, and so We were out in the field doing whatever maneuvers we were doing, and I got picked up by a garbage truck. Well, it was an LMTV, but it was filled with garbage. And so they loaded us back in. They didn't tell us what was going on. They brought us back to Donna Ana Base Camp, which was where our headquarters was staged or whatever. And they explained to us the situation. And they were looking for the rifle more than they were looking for the soldier, I think.
Yeah,
But
probably.
he had a loaded 249 machine gun. And so they gave us blank rounds to make us look more intimidating, I guess. We were walking arms linked from one another through the desert looking for this guy with blank rounds. And we were supposed to like not approach him. We are supposed to call and say we found the person or whatever, and they let the authorities handle it. They eventually did find him. He unfortunately he killed himself. But the stories, my wife asks me sometimes why I'm so calm and why I'm so patient. I'm like, you have no fucking idea. I you have no fucking idea. You
My
know.
wife's the same way. She's like, I don't know how you're calm in this situation. I was like, look, you gotta see some actual crazy shit, and then you're like, yeah, this isn't anything. Yeah, let it go.
Yeah.
So, well, I before we leave, I do have one question I wanted to ask you while we were on the air. We've always heard the phrase, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." So, if you're fighting the same enemy, those people usually allied with you. I don't know if you've seen those Lego videos that Iran's been putting out, but
Mm-mm.
I was asked this question. There's really funny propaganda videos. That's what they are. They are propaganda. They are meant to sway the public opinion in a different way. But the question I would ask is, at what point do we not say that the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Because I don't think Iran is a regime we want to partner with. You know that even we both have. There's people here who are done with the Trump administration, done with the regime, just like Iran is. But at some point, we have to make those distinctions. Where does that line draw for you?
Well, I don't say my enemy and my enemy is my friend in the sense of Iran because I mean, they really are our enemy. I mean, truly. But that doesn't mean I agree on the actions of the Trump administration either. Do I lose any sleep over the Ayatollah being killed? Absolutely not. It wouldn't bother me as much as if there wasn't the bombing of a girls' school, if there wasn't the bombing of a hospital. I still wouldn't necessarily agree with it, but I could stomach it a lot easier because I'd be like, yeah, fuck them. You know, the military leaders and that type of thing, I could give a fuck. I really could. But I don't think it was a strategic move. It's the same with Iraq. I didn't agree with the war in Iraq. Do I think Saddam was great? Fuck no. I lose no sleep over the fact that he got hung. I lose no sleep over the fact that Maduro was captured. But does it make sense strategically? Does it benefit the United States? I would say it does the fucking opposite. And I think we see that every day when we go to the gas pump. We've created this hostile situation in the Strait of Hormuz and in the Middle East, which was already, kind of a destabilized region already, but we just blew it up even more, and it's going to take a long time for us to come back from that. It really is. Even if we just pulled out, I mean, it's still going to fuck us up for a long time.
Even price wise, it's probably 18 to 24 months. I think for me, military to military targets are fine to me. I think that when I look at how this administration has taken away from public services to fund an unnecessary conflict, it pisses me off. I mean, the Ayatollah Khamenei isn't a person that I personally had affections for. I don't care. He directed the IRGC to put those EFP IEDs in Iraq while we were there, right? Those maimed and killed multiples of our people. You're right. I agree with you. I don't necessarily lose sleep that he's dead. Here's where I do lose sleep. I do lose sleep in the fact that we don't know who's in control, that we do know that there's fissile nuclear material, and that we do know that there's malactors in that area that may or may not have access to it. I think everyone can kind of understand there's no clear plan here, no clear end game, no clear exit. I think that works well for Israel. I think that gives them a foothold in the region and a reason to say to encourage our continued cooperation. But the way I answered that question, as I said, I think that if we are to come out of this administration with a more collaborative mindset in which we want government to work for its people, the Iranian effort at propaganda and to slow up the Trump administration's effort to consolidate its own authority in the region is a benefit to all of us. But do I think that at the end of the day, when all things are said and done, we're going to hold Iranian hands and sing Kumbaya? I don't think that's a possibility at this point.
And Iran's gonna to do things to hurt our economy now because they know that's where they can hit us. They know they can't fucking hit us militarily. Not to say that they can't hurt us at all, but they just don't have the superiority. They
Right?
fucking don't. But the way they're being strategic about hurting our economy and doing other things like that, I think they're very aware of that, and I think they're going to use that. That's why Trump is getting so antsy about things. You know, he said he was going to do this in 3 days, and now it's 10 days that he's going to attack all these strategic things, the power plants and the bridges, and destroy their military. And he hasn't done it yet. We'll see.
I mean, I think when I saw his little tweet today where it says "open
Oh
it back
God.
up, open the fucking straight," it's like he has no filters left. It reminds me of
Happy
like
Easter.
an yeah, an elderly person that's got like clearly no filters left anymore. And you're like, oh great, this is who's leading us. And I don't like it's not a surprise to me. I don't think that that's anything different. At the same time, it's just this is being done in our name. Whether you have voted for it or not, it doesn't matter. This administration is acting on the behalf of the entirety of the country, and I think it is meritful to say that that's not acceptable behavior. And
You
I
can't
think
say
that
shit like that to people that will willingly martyr themselves to watch America burn, you know?
I remember in Afghanistan they put suicide vests on Down syndrome kids. They will go that far. Do not care
They had a
because the
pregnant woman
end
when I
goal.
was in Iraq that walked into a market, you know? I mean, it wasn't just insurgents in Iraq killing military members. I would say while I was there were more incidents of Iraqi insurgents killing other Iraqis. There was a
Mm,
pregnant woman that walked out with a suicide vest in a market and just blew up a bunch of Iraqi people in the market. So when I saw incidents like that, despite not agreeing with the war in Iraq, I saw some of the good aspects of us being there when it came to stuff like that or them being
right.
able to freely vote. But the problem is in a region that's so destabilized like that, same with Afghanistan, when we left Afghanistan and it just went right back to shit, you can't force democracy on people. Like the second you leave, and Biden got a lot of shit for it. I think it would have happened that way regardless if it was Biden or somebody else who pulled out, because there was never going to be a good time to pull out. It just wasn't going to happen. It hurts that I fought in the war in Iraq and people now deem the war in Iraq and Afghanistan as a loss for us.
That became wholly unfocused. I mean, when we went to Afghanistan, the mission that we got for the higher op order was so broad. Like when I get as an intelligence analyst, you're giving me something specific. Here are the names of people. Here's the key terrain. This is the type of government style we want you to. Here are the mosques that are like you get all this stuff, and that was absent. And it was just we stopped being lethal. We stopped being determined to achieve certain goals to leave, right? Like we go to Afghanistan, we're going to get rid of the Taliban, we're going to get rid of Al Qaeda, and then we're going to allow a coalition government of the coalition in the Northeast, as well as the remnants of the Kabul warlords to form a government, right? That's an objectionable wartime effort. That's not been done here, not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan, certainly not in Iran. And you can kind of see that mismanagement that came from the hubris of leadership. Oh, we're going to win. We've got the best weapons. We've got a missile that can put it within a hair of your mustache. Okay, can that get into the Hindu Kush Mountains, which are almost granite? No. So what good is that technological advantage then? We have put ourselves into a consistent quagmire and we've diluted our thinking saying, oh, we've got these weapons that are so smart, we can target you at anywhere else. And they can find the simplest obstacles that prevent the lethality of those weapons, and without that, and without a cogent plan on how to change the direction of the country and to change what you don't like about it to be more beneficial, you've just stuck your foot in the mud and you're just spinning your wheels.
Well, you know, there's places they don't have the superiority to us, so they have to rely on those types of things. I mean, I'm sure you've got mortared during your time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And my experience with getting mortared is that there's no strategy whatsoever. Like they come up in a pickup truck or something, and they set up the mortar and they lob it in the general direction of the base and just hope it hits something. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the times it doesn't. And the first time I ever was involved in a mortar attack, my asshole clenched up so tight. I'd never been in that situation. That was my first combat situation. But after a while, you get very blasé to it. You're like, yeah, wake me up when it's over. You know, did anybody die? Okay. But did you die?
We came back, we're at Bagram in Afghanistan, and I'm just done with this shitty deployment. I'm done with all the dumb bullshit. The alarms go off. We're being rocketed. And I just lean out of my bunk and I pick my Kevlar up and I put it over my head and I just go back to sleep.
But hey, that's just how it is, man. That's how it is in the service. But
Oh,
it's been great swapping stories with you and answering some of these questions. I think it was an amazing episode. If you did like the episode, I do want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel. It supports us. I'm Kevin Price,
Kevin Reed.
and thank you for joining us again on Tactical Pause.